Hey, I'm Rachel.
And I'm Amanda, and this is Beyond a Ballot.
Welcome to another episode of Beyond a Ballot. I'm Rachel, and hi, Amanda. Parliament's back.
We're back.
I love Parliament coming back because it means I get to dork out and watch Question Period.
So let's tell them what really happened today. How
okay,
I was
fine.
sitting.
I'm going to admit my sins.
I'm sitting in the podcast waiting room for Rachel, texting her, being like, "Girl, where are you?" And then she comes on, and like she could have been doing a million things, a million actually.
Things.
She's a mom. She runs her own business. She's busy. No. She was watching Question Period,
and I
Rachel,
don't regret it. I don't regret it. It was so good. It was like, oh, I have to go. I have to turn Pierre off. I can't believe it.
But like,
they just were going at each other.
It's not even a thing that people watch Question Period. Not really.
Okay. You're right. And I'm a huge nerd, but really, I mean, this episode, actually, this is so perfect, but this episode is really about communications. And I was wondering, with Parliament back in session, what are they talking about? How are they feeling? What do they look like? What are they saying? How are they being messaged? And so I was like, oh, I'll spend a couple minutes watching Question Period. It sucked me in because we have some incredible communicators in the House right now. And so with everything going on, I was like, how are they framing these questions? And then Jagmeet comes out and he starts talking, and it's like, how's he doing in the polls? What's the country feeling about the NDP today? I had all these questions. So I really got into it, and that's why I was late. I'm sorry. But for those who want to watch, you can watch online. Just Google Parl View.
It's true. Interested. Or if you just want a snapshot, you can come to the Beyond a Ballot podcast and we will tell you all about it. It actually is the perfect segue because we wanted to talk about communications. I feel like if you're in the politics bubble, you're definitely talking about the communication strategy. And even if you're not, you're consuming it, right? Because you're being spoon-fed lines and messages from politicians all the time. So let's start where it all begins, where Rachel spent her afternoon, which was listening to Question Period, which, some may describe as like, a place where ideas are exchanged and where there's a discourse amongst our leaders. And some may describe it as an absolute circus. And that is, I think, kind of the space we're in right now. Would you agree?
Yeah. And interestingly, Joe Clark, who's a former prime minister, had a quote that was all over the media this week that said that the House of Commons has become more of a stage than an institution. And that's something I've been thinking about all week, actually, because just in the context of communications, is it become a stage? Question Period itself, this is what I was really thinking. Question Period itself, I'll give him that. But if you watch the House of Commons, and again, I'm probably the only one in Canada that does, not during Question Period, it's really House business. And it's important work that goes on as well. And so I think to, degrade the concept of the House of Commons to a stage wasn't really fair for a former prime minister.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because if you read or read Althea Raj this week with the Toronto Star, she referred to it this way. The 45-minute daily accountability session continued with nonstop shouting. You don't understand anything. You're out of touch. And how do you sleep at night, bro? I can't believe that was like that came out of the mouth. Anyway.
Oh my God.
Too far. And accusations from the Conservatives and Liberals accusing each other of supporting Putin.
That's what they were doing today too.
That the Bloc complained to the speaker that he had lost control of the chamber, and it was so out of control that he couldn't follow what was happening because of the increase in volume was so high that he didn't know who was hurling which insult at whom.
Like everyone's iWatch was going off saying like, too loud.
Exactly.
You get that warning.
Totally.
It's going to hurt your ears.
But like, to whose benefit is this, right? If it becomes, if we descend into a place where it's just a shouting match, nothing better than like a playground bullying sesh, then we lose the opportunity to have the discussion that ends up, well, you may not watch Question Period. Question Period often becomes what media follow, becomes what you read in the news. It becomes the story of the day. So if it's just a shouting match, really, it's a huge disservice to Canadians who are expecting the people that they've elected into office to be solving problems, not hurling insults.
Yeah. And I'm going to put the blame on the speaker and the media a little bit. I love the media, but I'm going to blame them in this case because really what they're looking for is that soundbite. They have basically 1 hour a day to frame the narrative of what's happening in Ottawa. And while the House sits for hours a day and they really do amazing work, the only thing that really gets covered is Question Period. And so I guess, I mean, I'm not a communications expert like you are, but I guess what the teams are thinking is, especially on the government side, all the ministers, like, what's our line? What do we want pick up on? How do we frame this issue? And they know that the media is watching. So that's their opportunity. It's hard. Also, for those that don't know, like to prep these ministers for Question Period, they come in with like huge binders. The ministers come in with lines that they have pre-crafted that they can use or not use. Some don't. And so like this is a huge communications exercise, Question Period in itself.
Yeah, but I would argue that you can be clever and witty and imaginative with your lines without descending into the toxic vitriol that we've seen in the House of Commons. And I think that is where I take great offense as a Canadian listening to it, because I think you're wasting our time now, our taxpayer dollars, with lines like bro to each other. I mean, keep it, I don't know. I just think it's too far. But I do think it's a spillover effect from the way that we have allowed the vitriol to really dominate social media. And that leads us nicely into our next topic, which is, there was a big story this week that happened over social media. So for those of you who are still crazy and on Twitter/X and listening to some of these political conversations, you'll see that it's really ugly out there. It's super toxic. There are a lot of trolls and a lot of bots, and it can get really ugly really quickly. And that's what happened this week. Rachel, do you want to share the story?
Yeah. So I'm going to just basically outline it from high level, which is that Supriya, who was on our pod a few weeks ago, is now a staffer in PMO. She went in as, what is she, like a special advisor?
Senior advisor, a special advisor. Yep.
Anyways, we're really excited about it, but she then had an exchange with, I believe, Canada Proud. Is that what it's called?
Yes, Canada
I should know
Proud.
this. Okay. They are typically like a right-leaning media outlet. Is that what they call themselves? I don't know.
I don't even know if you can call them a media outlet.
They're like they create memes and they like do I'm butchering what they do, but you go online and look at them and you can understand. But they come from the right primarily. They got in a Twitter exchange that was just wild. And for those that were on Twitter, it was, everyone's waiting for the next move. Who's going to respond? Canada Proud tweeted to her. She tweeted back some pretty sexually explicit things, especially coming from somebody who's working in the Prime Minister's office. And so there was a lot of talk about whether or not there should be consequences for her, whether or not this was appropriate for a PMO staffer to be tweeting. She held her own and she doubled down on the fact that she was going to tweet this and that it was fine. And I don't think I processed it properly yet. whether or not.
Yeah, it was a big deal this week. Canada Proud. I don't think anyone can legitimately call them any kind of journalistic body. I think they're often referred to as a right wing influence group. Is how
influence group. Oh,
an influence group is how they're often described. They have been accused many times, and Supriya made the same accusation of coordinated harassment campaigns and the dissemination of quote unquote vile disinformation. So it started there. And the exchange happened over a series of posts. And then it kind of went into some pretty graphic places. It is not uncommon for Canada Proud to provoke these kind of arguments. So it is like par for the course for this organization. So I have to say, well, the language that Supriya used was graphic. I think at some point, and especially, I'm going to say this, women on X or women on Twitter, and I've been off Twitter now for, I think, oh my gosh, almost a year. And the reason why I'm off it is because it got so vile and so ugly. They actually, bots went after my son's Instagram. Like, it was insane. What? And it was like,
that's scary.
Frequent attacks from right-wing bots and coordinated campaigns. And I had it. I'm like, I'm not going to have a reasonable, interesting dialogue with anyone on here if it's always, if it's always taken over by these groups. And so I think at some point she was like, you know what? F you. I don't want it. Enough of you. You can't be on these platforms disseminating your vile disinformation campaigns without anyone checking you. There's no check and balance. There's nothing that says, thank you, sir, please stop. And it stops. And I think it got the best of her, and she got as angry as probably many of us feel inside. So I'm going to defend her on this one. I think the choice of language, maybe not the best, but I can certainly appreciate, having been on the receiving end of their provocations, how challenging that can be. And, someone had to put their foot down.
I love her. I'll support her till the end. She's awesome. And I'm so thrilled she went to PMO because she's a great addition there.
Yes.
This situation though, like, maybe I'm just an old school staffer, but if I was in PMO, I would feel that weight fully, that I represent the prime minister. I represent the office. It's not even that you're, in a minister's office, absolutely fine. Maybe the gravity isn't there as much. In PMO, you're like working for a leader of a government that operates globally. Imagine a foreign government picking that up and saying, like, here's what Justin Trudeau's staff are saying online. Yeah. That for me is where the line is. And so, go for it, do it. Awesome. Completely agree, except for the fact that she's representing by virtue of being there, the institution of the prime minister's office. And so the whole time I was like questioning where that line is. Like, when does PMO say, no, this is not appropriate? I know for a fact, like in PMOs that I worked with, that could never have happened. There's no way, because it's an office. You may not respect the person the prime minister is, but you can respect their office, and that's who she's representing.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, this goes to what we just spoke about previously, which is like the lines have been so blurred and we've pushed these conversations into such ugly places, toxic places, that it's sort of an anything goes mentality. We have lost the respect, I think, that we once had for some of these institutions, and the respect for each other to have meaningful, productive conversations. That being said,
hit the nail on the head, though, with the social media. I'd be interested in what Sir Johnny McDonald's PMO was like.
Totally.
With no social media and like
it was easier then, I think, maybe.
I think they fist fought, actually.
Oh, totally.
Pretty sure there was a lot of violence.
On the street.
Exactly.
Let's do it.
Everyone has their ups and downs in politics.
Exactly. Okay. So our last topic for today we found out some absolutely crazy numbers, fundraising numbers that were coming in for the Conservative Party, who raised in 2023, was it $33 million?
35 million. There's only 40 million Canadians.
I was just going to say, it's almost like $1 million a person.
It's $1 a person.
$1.
It's crazy.
Wow.
I wish $1 million a person.
Exactly. It's almost $1 a person.
What do you even do? I've never even worked for a political party with that much money. Like, what do you even do with it?
No, it's so much. It's so much money. So the Liberals, in contrast, raised about 15 million, which doesn't sound as good, but in good news, obviously they've taken a hit in the polls. Their fundraising numbers did not go down. So their fundraising numbers remain steady, which I think is an important thing for us to talk about, because it suggests that their current support is still steady as well.
But here's my question. I saw these numbers. Yeah, I saw these numbers and I'm like, but do dollars equate to support? Like, honestly, we look at polls and we think, okay, here's what the polls are saying. Great. They could be different next week. But is money really more accurate at predicting support of a political party or not?
I think it is. I think it is, because I think also for anyone to open their wallets during particularly challenging financial times, you got to care a lot. Like, you have to care. There's a lot of things to spend money on. You're spending extra money on your groceries. You're spending so much money on your kids' childcare and their activities, whatever it is. And then to somehow find, the extra dollars to spend on a political party, like, you've got to really, really care. So kudos to the Conservatives for bringing in that kind of cash. Where does it go? We know where it goes. Ads. We are going to be bombarded with Conservative ads, people.
Yeah. And you know what?
Yes.
That's great. That's great. I was going to make another
Of course you think it's great.
Yeah, I love it. I'll watch Pierre talk to his children, or those 15-minute videos that he's doing on policy issues. Can't wait for more of those. I'll fund that. I think it's great breakdowns. But yeah, it's a lot of money. 35 million. And
it's a lot of
this
money.
is what I was going to say. For those that don't know, traditionally, the Tories are phenomenal fundraisers. And this goes back to decades ago when I can't remember who was responsible for the Conservative Fund at the time, but decided that instead of going for maximum donations, the Conservatives were going to chase smaller donations. And this was like really a shift in fundraising that changed the game, because they started really asking for $5 or $2 or $1. And it's not about how much people give you, but how many people give you. Yeah. Especially because the Conservatives brought in a cap on how much you can donate. Yeah. That was a great strategy, because they had the ability to reach a ton of people for small donations, which ultimately added up.
So I still think, I could be wrong about this. Maybe I'm wrong. But isn't it the Liberals who still bring in the smaller donations, but at a higher quantity? Do you know the answer to that?
I'm pretty sure it's the Tories.
Really? So they bring in really?
They bring in.
I'm curious what the average donation is of each.
Maybe we should have
I'm trying to find it quickly while we're on here.
Yeah. I'm 99% sure it's the Tories who started really building momentum with small donations.
So the number of donors, it's hard to see quickly.
But then the Liberals also got rid of their membership fees.
Liberals' median donation amount is $12.50.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's
What's
so
the
low.
Tories, like $1? I'm gonna put my dollar on the fact that it's the Tories that are bringing in smaller amounts. But we can look that up, and
we're gonna look it up. We'll look that up, and I do know
we'll tweet it out.
Yeah, or we won't. We won't go. Or we won't go on that.
We're
platform.
Not going on it. We're not.
We'll go on Instagram. Share it there.
Yeah, we'll Instagram it out.
But you can all expect. Obviously, we're almost in an election year or a 12-month election cycle. Not quite, but I think we have about 18 months to go.
Yep.
And you will see an absolute bombardment of pre-election ads. Those will be slated to go imminently. We've already seen actually.
Will the Tories make another $35 million this year and go into an election with like,
I'm sure they will,
$100 million? Could you imagine?
I'm sure they will. Wow. I can't imagine them bringing in less than that in a year that precedes an election. Now, how the American election goes may influence the number of donors. I would imagine that the Liberal Party will use that election to help drive more donations for their party. So let's see what happens there.
Yes.
But the last ad campaign that Polyev did was a $3 million ad spend in the summer, the last major ad campaign. A $3 million ad spend in the summer, which was kind of like his rehabilitation campaign to rebrand him with a softer image. So maybe we'll see a little bit more of that too.
And maybe we'll see Justin Trudeau do a rehabilitation brand campaign with his
could happen.
15 million. Could happen. I'd be interested in that actually. Anyways, we'll have to wait and see what they provide us to talk about. All right. Up next, we have Melanie Paradis, who's going to talk to us about communications and some of the challenges around governments defending their decisions, talking about policies and this specific government and what they can do differently. Stay tuned. Today, we want to talk about the elephant in the room, the government's communication issues. Like any government, after a decade in power, we start to see issues arise. But how does a government use communications as a tool to weather these issues? We wanted to pick the brain of somebody who might have some insight on this topic, definitely has some insight on this topic, having served as Director of Strategic Communications in the Office of the Leader of the Opposition, so the conservative side of politics. Melanie Paradis is here with us today. Hi, Melanie.
Thanks so much for having me.
We are so thrilled to have you on. And I think this is we've talked about whether or not governments expire, but we've never really looked at the complications that come with communicating as a government after a decade in power. And I think a lot of Canadians are thinking about that right now as issues arise. And so I wanted to really have you on as somebody who works in strategic communications to kind of break down some of the issues that they're having and that every government has at some point with communication. Also, hi, Amanda. Why don't you tell us a little bit? I'm here too. Yeah, okay. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and some of the work that you do?
Sure. So I'm Melanie Paradis. I'm the president of Texture Communications, which is a company I founded after retiring from politics, I guess.
Is that possible to retire from politics?
No,
I don't know.
Not really. So I spent most of my career working in public relations and government relations, both at consultancies and in-house. I worked with Indigenous governments. I worked in mining in a variety of sectors. But I've always had politics as kind of a side hustle. So I'd have a day job and then I'd work on political campaigns, both for the federal Conservatives and the provincial Conservatives in Ontario, although I've been involved in other provincial campaigns across the country as well. I served in Andrew Scheer's 2019 War Room, in Aaron O'Toole's on his leadership campaign, both in 2017 and in 2020. Obviously, in 2020, we were successful. I served on leaderships provincially, but also for Doug Ford's central campaign in 2018. Have been involved in all sorts of campaigns and in conservative politics and lots of different communications roles.
We always like to ask this question because we've had so many interesting women on the pod who have talked about their start in politics. So I have to ask, were you like a kid who was involved in student government who knew that one day you would have some involvement in politics, or what was the spark that got you involved?
So definitely in high school, I was in the Model United Nations debating team, which is super cool, right? And I studied politics in university, but I was never really I wasn't a campus conservative. I wasn't involved in a political party early on. It wasn't actually until I met Tim Hudak in the early 2010s at an event, and we started talking about the Ring of Fire and Indigenous policies, and he just asked me point blank, like, why aren't you working on our team? Like, what are you doing? Why are you not involved in the conservative movement? And I said, to be honest with you, it's because in my line of work, working with Indigenous governments, it's kind of embarrassing to be a conservative. We don't have a lot of policies that speak to them. At the time, we didn't. And he said, well, the only way that that's going to change is if you join and change it yourself. And I was like 23 or 24 at the time and taken aback by that. But I took him up on it and I just started showing up. I literally just started showing up to stuff and got more and more involved and ended up writing policies. Actually, one of the ones I'm most proud of is years ago, initially under Tim and then under Patrick Brown, myself and a few others in Ontario wrote the resource revenue sharing policy that is now the policy of the government of Ontario under Doug Ford to negotiate resource revenue sharing with First Nations and Métis communities. And I'm incredibly proud that was a conservative policy that continues to exist today. Yeah. And I've tried to bring that with me to federal politics as well.
That is something you should be proud of. That's amazing.
Definitely.
Let's jump into the communications aspect of this conversation. And, Amanda could talk to us about this too. And so Amanda, feel free to jump in about communication. I was going to say, stuff. This is... Yeah, but I'll just host and you two can answer. So the communication struggles that we're seeing are, I was with the Conservative government in 2014, and I feel for the Liberals at this point because I think that we had a lot of those challenges too. And I'm wondering if you can kind of break down for us, being in those rooms, in the war room, in the opposition leader's office, how does it feel to be there and triaging issues that arise? Like, what are some of the on the ground rules that you stand by when it comes to messaging these issues?
So opposition is incredibly different from government because the government really rules the day. Like, the government decides what we're talking about, and in opposition, we're just constantly chasing. Occasionally, you get lucky and you get to set the narrative for a minute, and then very quickly that goes away. You're really just reacting on a constant basis. And so what's really important, what's really foundational when you're in a reactive communication state is you have to really know your core brand if you're a company, but certainly your core brand as a politician. And you've got to know what you stand for, who you are, and that applies to your party as well. And really just those core values that underpin everything. So with Aaron O'Toole, this required a bit of like a brain meld where you really needed to have his voice in your head. And that was something that our communications team we were driven to be constantly thinking in his voice. It was a lot easier for me because I'd worked for him for 5 years by the time he became the leader, because we'd worked on his previous leadership too. It was something that needed to be taught to some of the other staff, but being able to think like him and hear his voice in your head so that you can imagine like what would he say about this really helps you to define a response, a reaction in particular, quickly, to the point where I've got a couple of examples where he'd be in an airplane without connection during a leadership campaign, and we would have to respond to things without him actually approving it. And we were able to do that successfully. Thankfully, we only had to do that once or twice. But it was just so urgent that we really needed to respond on his behalf. And he had a team of people that had been around him, myself included, for years. And so that made it a lot easier for us to know what the response would be. If you're in opposition, if you're in government, I think that same thing holds true. You have to know the voice and the values of the politician. And that has to be consistent. Otherwise, things start to go squirrely.
Okay, so I'm going to talk about the elephant in the room, which is the communication strategy of the current Liberal government, which there's been a lot of opinions on. And at times I think has been really, really strong, and at times I think has faltered in, given the myriad of issues that they face. So we can set that aside and just focus on communications for a moment. It is like I have just waved my magic wand and you are in the PMO. You are a liberal today.
Yes.
What would your advice be at this juncture heading into an election next year? What is one or two things that you think the current government could or should do that would improve their communication strategy? Just a small question.
Okay. So I think that some of my peers would respond to this by simply saying that the prime minister should, step down and let somebody else run. That I want to shout out my husband, Mitch Heimpel, has got a great piece in the Line this week about brand and about the prime minister's brand in particular. And I think he's got a lot of good points there. But I happen to be of the mind that so the prime minister did a tour in 2017 that I like to refer to as the apology tour. I don't even remember what it was about, like what he was apologizing for, but he went from like school gymnasium to school gymnasium all across the country and just listened to Canadians vent about their electricity bills, about like, I'll never forget the woman in Peterborough who held up her electricity bill and cried and they embraced. And it was a very cathartic process for Canadians. And he took a lot of crap from people at those events. There were heated moments. He got yelled at and people really respected him for it. And so if I took my partisan hat off for a second and didn't give you the, you should just resign line, then I think that one of the things that PMO should consider is, and maybe it's too far gone, maybe it's too messy of a situation right now, I don't know, but I think Canadians really respect someone who's willing to hear a lot of difficult stuff from a group of people and really listen and acknowledge it. And if necessary, in some circumstances, apologize for that. I think there's a ton of value. So that would probably be the first thing that I would recommend doing, is a 2017 style apology tour.
Okay.
So can you talk to me a little bit about that? I just want to dive in there because Trudeau, our current prime minister, came in 2015 on such an incredible brand, right? And I haven't read your husband's piece, but I'm going to dive into this concept of brand a little bit. He did that. He went and listened to Canadians. He really played to the heartstrings of Canadians, and Canadians felt that he was their champion in 2015. Now we see, and we've seen, this week we just saw fundraising numbers come out that are showing that they're not doing as well as the Conservatives. There's polls saying that they're not doing as well as the Conservatives. And Trudeau is really wearing that at this point. How does that happen? I think a lot of Canadians are sitting there saying, like, hey, I really like this guy. What happened? And like, what's the communication strategy on the opposition side that would pivot Canadians' feelings towards Trudeau?
I think that this has been a long-term erosion, that no one thing is responsible for the prime minister suddenly doing poorly. It feels like all of a sudden it's very bad, but this was a result of a lot of little things and big things that have happened over the course of the past couple of years that have led to, by and large, I think the sentiment among Canadians, and what Pierre Poilievre is very accurately hitting the nail on right now. Like, he's recently pivoted to focusing on how tired Canadians are of Justin Trudeau. This is an important pivot because it's not that they don't like him. It's not that they don't think he's well-intentioned.
Right.
It's that they're tired of the situation and him. It's really hard to get out of that mode once people have made that decision about you. But I don't think it's impossible, and I'll never count the Liberals down and out, because that would be foolish.
Yeah. I want to touch on the role that the opposition plays in framing and reframing. This particular opposition led by Poilievre has been, in my opinion, pretty masterful when it comes to communications. And I say that, I kind of choke on my words, but I'm just going to say it. So And there are some incredible communicators in the Liberal Party. Incredible.
Yep.
And, you know, it's terrible because some of these things fall at the feet of communicators, and you really, you know, you hate that for them because this shouldn't fall on their shoulders. There's some incredible people there. But the opposition party has done an excellent job of kind of framing and reframing and positioning and repositioning in order to steer, some would say, kind of like mirror back the angst and anxiety that Canadians feel about their current situations and say, like, I'm the person for you. Talk a little bit about that strategy and how you think that helped to erode the position that the Liberals find themselves in the polls right now.
So I think from a strategy standpoint, there's a lot of research that goes into this, not just polling, but I think more importantly, focus groups, because that's the only way that you get a real understanding of the motivations behind, like, why are people thinking this? Why are they feeling this way? And then also the nuance, again, that nuance difference between not liking the guy and just being tired of him and the situation. The opposition, really the only thing they can do is provide a contrast and to emphasize weaknesses in the current leadership of the country. And so they've quite strongly like latched onto that. And, you know, to Pierre Poilievre's credit, he doesn't have a speechwriting team. Like he comes up with all of that stuff himself. He always has. He is a masterful communicator and always has been. He's got his finger on the pulse. I think it's probably both a blessing and a curse, because that is, it got to be exhausting. I don't think it's sustainable for any politician to do that for as long as he's going to need to do it. It's got to be super tiring. I don't think it will stay that way. I'm sure that he will continue to grow his team around him. And as people have been around him longer, there'll be more trust to, you know, allow for speeches to be prepared and more communications products without his involvement. He's very, very hands-on in everything that he does. But the benefit of that is he's got this really consistent core brand that just doesn't waver. Like, you know who he is. Whether you like it or not, you know who he is. And he's very consistent.
But that being said, he went through a pretty big rebrand this summer.
Yes.
So let's talk about that, because that was, you know, obviously a pointed rebrand, a decision to make him more approachable, more relatable. How do you think that played into Canadians' current perception of Poilievre?
I think that they didn't have one before. And I know people in the bubble, we hate this. And in politics, we're like, what do you mean? He's the most popular politician. Like, how could people not know who he is? I'm not kidding when I say that. When I recently spoke with Aaron O'Toole, and he told me that he still gets random people come up to him on the street and be like, hey, aren't you the leader? Like, he was
really?
Like, it was 2 years ago. Like, the average Canadian, the average voter doesn't know what's going on with who our leaders are, who's the leader of the opposition, whatever. Now, Pierre Poilievre is really effective at using social media, at like getting his name and his brand out there. And he's been around for a long time in politics. So he definitely has an established brand. But I think that even with all that, there was still such a low level of awareness amongst Canadians that really that pivot, you know, his glow up, so to speak.
Totally.
It was well timed, because most Canadians I don't think they remember the guy with glasses.
Oh, I would have loved to be a fly on the wall in that meeting where they choose his new outfits and his glasses. And
we're going to put you in a tight t-shirt.
Yeah.
You look jacked all the time.
I've been in those meetings with other politicians, and they are hilarious. It's usually men, and they're like, what do you mean I can't wear this t-shirt anymore? And you're like, focus on policy. You know, we'll deal with your outfits. I want to just talk about that contrast, touch on what you were saying, because when I think about it, coming from the political strategy world, I think, you know, it's amazing what the Conservatives have done, because bringing in Pierre, who's a young guy who's been in the political world for decades, opposed to a young guy who's been in the political world for decades, you know, it's kind of masterful in how they've been able to wedge those identities and say, this is option A, this is option B, as opposed to like if there was a woman of color that would be who was
a lawyer for like 25 years and had a bunch of experience outside of politics.
Right. So yeah, well, it's just interesting to me to go back and see the way that they framed Pierre. But I also, before we end here, I want to put a test case in front of you. How would you have dealt with the recent issue with the ethics commissioner? So we talked about this on the pod a couple of weeks ago, that Trudeau went and stayed with a friend on his vacation. They preemptively released that they had that he was paying for certain parts, et cetera, et cetera. He came back. The opposition, the Conservatives, pushed him, brought them to committee and to talk about whether or not this was an ethics violation. This week, we saw the ethics commissioner come out and say, staying with a friend for free is not an ethics violation. How would you have messaged this whole situation from start to finish before he left and coming back? Or did they do it properly, in your opinion?
So I do honestly think this is another bubble issue. I don't know how much this has really resonated with the average Canadian. And we can get kind of tied up in these things. But in this case, I feel like this has happened so many times now that it's a bit, the only thing that is silly to me is that this wasn't anticipated and planned for better in advance. It's not so much that the way in which it was dealt with was bad. It's just, it probably could have just been addressed earlier and more succinctly to try to, make it go away. Like, just do it clean and fast. Rip the Band-Aid off, as opposed to just letting this story kind of come out the way that it did.
Yeah.
I have one last question. Okay. They say that politics is a blood sport. Probably the bloodiest part of it is communications. You've been in the trenches and you know what that means. And I'm sure you've taken a few hits yourself on Twitter and in other spaces. How challenging is it to do communications professionally and effectively and productively right now in politics?
Oh, honestly, my feelings, my heart go out to everyone in communications in politics right now. It is so much. It's amazing to me how much worse it is than 2 years ago, because I feel like it was terrible then.
Yes.
But it is so much worse now, because at least even when it was terrible, and remember that Aaron O'Toole was the leader during COVID, like the entirety of his leadership was COVID. Wow. Even then, there was still like a Team Canada approach to a lot of things.
Yeah. So
it wasn't unnecessarily ridiculous and toxic.
Yes.
Whereas now there's nothing, I feel like there's nothing politically that forces us to work together and to unite us across party lines to our detriment. And I think we are all worse off for it. And the only thing that I can offer is there are small moments, even in the chaos, where I think of like Melanie Paradis, who was the decom for Jagmeet Singh at the time when I was decom for Aaron, and we have the same first name. And there were a lot of journalists who would accidentally email one of us something meant for the other. So I'd get emails asking for comment from Singh. She'd get emails asking for comment from O'Toole. And because it was COVID, we never actually met in person. But we had this weird unspoken camaraderie for each other.
That's awesome.
And it's little things like that that I think are really important for people to get through this messy political time, is to try to make some kind of human connection with people on the other side of in any other party, really.
That's a great,
well said,
message to leave it on. It's true. We talk about that a lot, building those bridges amongst parties and the importance of that. Melanie, thank you so much for joining us and for breaking down the communication side of things in today's political world. We're so glad that you were able to join us.
Long-time listener, first-time caller. Thanks so much for having me. This was a blast.
We appreciate it. We'll be right back. And that's another episode of Beyond a Ballot podcast. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll be back next week.